What if what we usually call absolute truth is nothing more than a veil so dense it can divert even the most rational minds from perceiving deeper knowledge? This seemingly simple question often causes immediate discomfort. Such unease suggests the possibility that traditional views of existence, spirituality, and even salvation may be shaped by narrow interpretations that often ignore the subtler dimensions permeating the universe. Throughout history, we find records and legacies of thinkers who propose the existence of non-conventional realities, accessible only when the mind is willing to challenge established conventions. Modern audiences, however, sometimes feel trapped by the categorical statements of more orthodox schools of thought. Some might ask, what do you think? Do long-standing dogmas represent the pinnacle of wisdom, or could they be hiding significant gaps? This question becomes especially relevant when one notices the emergence of heterodox perspectives, such as Terence McKenna's Novelty Theory, or the mystical interpretations of esoteric currents rooted in Kabbalistic, Hermetic, and shamanic traditions. Accounts of ancient rituals, for example, describe encounters with entities and parallel realities, which contrasts with contemporary common sense that is centered on what is tangible and easily explained. In comparison, while many religious institutions insist on established dogmas, occultist scholars like Eliphas Levi and John Dee suggest that humanity may be on the verge of revealing latent perceptual powers. When these views clash, the controversial nature of the topic becomes evident. We see a clear tension between the official version and those interpretations that assign crucial importance to symbols, colors, and visionary experiences in expanding consciousness. In this context, there is no single definitive answer, but rather an invitation to reflect on what salvation or liberation really means. Such reflection demands a close look at traditions without ignoring scientific progress. In this intersection, the central questions emerge. To what extent is reality just what we see, and to what degree can an openness to subtle dimensions redefine the meaning of existing? Certain modern scholars dismiss as fanciful the idea that ancient civilizations possessed effective ways to manipulate states of consciousness. However, upon examining historical accounts and esoteric texts, a different perspective emerges. Many cultures left clues pointing to rites and practices intended to transcend ordinary perception. What does that reveal about humanity's understanding of spirituality over the centuries? When comparing these documents, one notices a stark contrast between what is commonly labeled common sense, which views such phenomena as mere folklore, and the views of those who believe in a universal mystical heritage. Sumerian and Egyptian records, for instance, refer to initiation rituals performed in underground chambers, often linked to symbolic death and spiritual rebirth. Texts attributed to Zosimos of Panopolis, dating from the Hellenistic period, describe alchemical procedures that he claimed were not limited to the transmutation of metals, but also aimed at purifying the soul. In the Kabbalistic realm, the Jewish tradition lays out paths of ascent through the Sephirot, suggesting a kind of ladder that connects the earthly dimension to higher levels of consciousness. Such historical passages reinforce the notion that the quest for the subtle is not a modern invention, but a legacy carried forward through symbols and practices. By comparison, the conventional approach typically labels these narratives as nothing more than myths or superstitions, especially in academic contexts that emphasize measurable empirical evidence. On the other hand, authors like Mirsha Eliade and Joseph Campbell observe that mythologies function as a symbolic language, condensing psycho-spiritual experiences that do not always fit Cartesian logic. This view, in turn, is supported by contemporary thinkers. According to Terence McKenna, the repeated appearance of themes like soul journeys and contact with transcendent entities in multiple civilizations cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence. He argues that novelty has been present since ancient times, driving advances in our understanding of what is real. In light of this, one might ask, what do you think? If so many cultures insisted on describing dreamlike experiences and encounters with hybrid beings, is there room to reconsider what we call impossible? From this perspective, heterodox interpretation suggests that humankind, in every era, has reached out to less obvious dimensions of existence. Furthermore, they indicate that these explorations never really ceased, merely taking on different forms, whether in magical practices or scientific research. It is also important to highlight the impact of Hermetic and Rosicrucian traditions that flourished during the Middle Ages and the European Renaissance. Thinkers such as Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus combined medical, alchemical, and astrological knowledge, believing that matter and spirit form a dynamic unity. Modern common sense tends to dismiss these ideas as outdated, overlooking the fact that these scholars sought to unify emerging scientific objectivity with principles of transcendence. Here, controversies arise. Could it be that instead of engaging in mystical delusion, these authors were tapping into legitimate aspects of reality? Today, guided experiences, such as Rick Strassman's psychedelic research described in DMT, the Spirit Molecule, have revived this debate. Preliminary results suggest that certain natural substances, when used in controlled environments, can reproduce visionary states similar to those described in ancient initiation rites. This connection sparks controversy, but it also opens doors to investigations that intertwine neuroscience with esoteric traditions. In other words, some interpret these phenomena as random brain chemical releases, while others see evidence of extraphysical dimensions. Which interpretation makes more sense? These opposing views underscore the need for a broader study of the historical and cultural roots of spirituality. Consequently, understanding the background and core concepts becomes a vital step in any research on parallel realities or expanded perceptions. In practical terms, one could conclude that the categorical rejection of ancient traditions and the blind worship of their teachings represent equally unwise extremes. The middle way, characterized by careful inquiry and open-mindedness, potentially offers the best clues for deciphering how far humanity can go in its journey toward the unknown. Is it possible that there is a point of convergence between the apparent rigidity of the material world and the infinite possibilities of the imagination? This question, as provocative as it is broad, lays the foundation for what many would call a liminal state. In general terms, it is an interval in which tangible experience and the perception of subtler dimensions overlap, allowing entry into a realm where the boundaries of what is real seem malleable. From an esoteric standpoint, this transitional state is highly regarded by mystical traditions that view the merging of the visible and invisible as a potential source of inner liberation. From a more orthodox viewpoint, though, the idea sounds fanciful, leading to doubts about the validity of any knowledge that goes beyond strictly empirical domains. Still, investigating the conceptual core that supports the reflections presented here means squarely confronting the multiple references to this zone of convergence. On one side, there are classical scientific interpretations grounded in robust experiments and observations, which usually demand material proof. On the other side, we have esoteric doctrines like Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, and Kabbalah, which describe reality as a complex mosaic of interpenetrating planes. How can these two seemingly opposing views be reconciled? The answer appears to lie precisely in Terence McKenna's proposal, which saw openness to novelty, that is, openness to whatever breaks conventional patterns, as a condition for consciousness itself to evolve. According to this line of thought, the human mind operates not only on a linear level, but also on multiple layers, which, in special circumstances, grant access to perceptions beyond the everyday. In many traditions, there are references to a hidden sacredness that manifests when a person sets aside prejudice or relinquishes an overdependence on fixed parameters. In this sense, the central point of the discussion revolves around accepting that reality may be more pliable than we imagine. What do you think? Could this flexibility be understood as a call to awaken within, an invitation to view the world as something in constant flux? Additionally, accounts of visionary experiences, whether through meditation, trance states, or the ritual use of entheogenic substances, become essential to support the claim that the line between the real and the symbolic is, in fact, thin. Although much of modern common sense rejects these accounts as too subjective, history shows that ancestral peoples have always turned to rites of passage to enter what they referred to as the spiritual world. In these stories, the feeling of entering a liminal state confirms the idea that there is a parallel universe accessible to anyone willing to confront the fear of the unknown. The same logic is found in studies of astral projection and in shamanic methods of contact with entities from other realms. While official science normally requires reproducible demonstrations, mystical traditions argue that certain phenomena are inherently personal, beyond the scope of laboratory parameters. It is precisely at this point that the liminal state stands out. It is not just a metaphor, but turns into an experience that, in essence, challenges the need for external proof. The inner experience becomes the focal point, suggesting that altering personal beliefs can significantly transform one's perceived reality. Hence, it is clear that the central element of this narrative lies in recognizing how fluid the boundaries are between the concrete and the symbolic. The awakening described by mystics throughout history, marked by the sense of crossing a threshold, is not merely an escape from reality, but rather an opportunity to embrace simultaneous dimensions. When expectations are shattered, one realizes that spiritual awakening, instead of relying on rigid dogmas, can be rooted in the direct experience of these transitional zones, which serve as gateways to a broader understanding of our being. In that sense, salvation might not be about blindly following religious institutions, but about cultivating a sensitivity that pierces veils and reveals new layers of meaning. So-called hybrid beings appear in mythologies across the globe, often portrayed as deities or messengers that combine human and animal characteristics and, in some contemporary accounts, even alien traits. In Egyptian artwork, for instance, Anubis has a human body and a jackal's head, representing the transition between life and death. In Mesoamerican culture, Quetzalcoatl is depicted as a feathered serpent, uniting the sky and the earth in its very form. The seeming strangeness of these entities points to a rupture with conventional patterns. For orthodox perspectives, they may be merely products of the imagination, but in esoteric approaches they function as symbolic gateways, hinting at the existence of parallel realities. What can we learn from this? In many traditions, these beings serve both as guardians and catalysts in initiation processes, expressing the notion that everything is connected and that physical form is only a reflection of something greater. Such symbols challenge common sense by suggesting that at the core of spirituality, the boundary between self and other may not be as well defined as it seems. Carl Jung, in his Reflections on Archetypes, described how hybrid figures convey deep contents of the collective unconscious, signaling the fusion of opposites and the pursuit of wholeness. Even if an orthodox reading reduces these entities to playful myths, some argue that they represent an essential key to decoding hidden aspects of existence. In this contrast lies the question: could these fantastic beings that appear in so many cultures hold a secret about the essential unity of life? In the same vein, the symbolic use of color stands out as another crucial feature. In shamanic rituals, color is often employed to induce specific states of consciousness, with each shade believed to carry a vibrational frequency that interacts with one's emotional and energetic field. Modern research in color psychology has shown that shades of red can stimulate vitality, while deeper blues tend to produce calming and introspective effects. However, in esoteric traditions such as certain Hermetic or Kabbalistic schools, the use of colors goes beyond simple human reactions. It functions as a symbolic language, a method of evoking archetypal forces and of connecting the practitioner to unseen realities. This becomes controversial when a strictly scientific paradigm contests the idea that colors can transport consciousness to other planes. Yet, for those who have experienced these states, the evidence emerges not from laboratory measurements, but from the undeniable power of direct experience. Another relevant point has to do with spiritual guides and archetypes, elements found in virtually every culture. Ancient Vedic texts speak of devas who guide humanity, while shamanic traditions mention spirit animals. Christianity presents angels and so forth. These figures are frequently described as mentors who inhabit higher dimensions and help in the journey toward self-discovery. From an orthodox perspective, such reports stem from psychological projections or superstitious beliefs. On the other hand, scholars like Joseph Campbell suggest that the repeated appearance of stories about transcendental guides in various mythologies indicates a universal archetype. In line with McKenna's view, these guides may be seen as manifestations of novelty that transcend cultural boundaries, carrying individuals beyond what is familiar. This raises the question: are these guides merely mental constructs, or do they represent real contact with intelligences from other levels of existence? The concept of symbolic death and transmutation also plays a central role in several esoteric systems. In initiation rituals, the aspirant often undergoes trials that symbolize the dissolution of old identities, preparing them for rebirth on a higher level of consciousness. Alchemical writings by Paracelsus describe a process where dense elements are purified until a subtle essence is obtained. To the average modern mindset, this may sound like medieval fantasy. However, researchers in transpersonal psychology suggest that although wrapped in symbolic narratives, these processes correspond to genuine stages of human development. Symbolic death, therefore, is not just a metaphor, but a real experience of shedding outdated layers, opening the way to psychic and spiritual renewal. Finally, the notion of consciousness gateways or portals stands out as the culminating concept in this analysis. In different cultures, crossing a mystical portal, whether a magic circle, a sacred cave, or a lucid dream, involves facing the unknown and potentially emerging with a broader view of reality. McKenna's Novelty Theory suggests that these thresholds act as integration points between the ordinary and the extraordinary. In the records of the apocryphal Gospels, for example, there are accounts of secret doors of wisdom that can be opened by those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. The traditional Orthodox reading views this as a mere allegory. Meanwhile, the heterodox interpretation, aligned with mysticism and esoteric practices, perceives these passages as confirmations of leaps in consciousness. This raises the question: what do you think? Are these portals simply spiritual metaphors, or do they point to real phenomena that challenge common logic? In these phenomena, hybrid beings, symbolic colors, spiritual guides, symbolic death, and mystical gateways. We see a framework of meanings that goes beyond the literal. Although the prevailing mindset often tries to reduce everything to purely psychological factors, the history of religions and consciousness research suggests broader interpretations. Ultimately, the purpose is not to confirm or deny any specific doctrine, but to shed light on inner processes that can change the way we see the world when recognized. The question is worth asking: could this historical and symbolic landscape, far from being mere superstition, actually embody a call to a kind of salvation that is born from an inner awakening, free from constraints, and open to the infinite dimensions of what is possible? Certain questions keep coming up when we consider the possibility of subtle planes, hybrid beings, and mystical gateways. How does any of this affect practical life? And to what extent can these ideas influence day-to-day decisions or the way we relate to the world? Many esoteric traditions insist that the self-awareness arising from these insights is not just an exercise in speculation, but a resource capable of reshaping personal attitudes and even promoting social transformations. Still, is it reasonable to believe that experiences labeled invisible could have such tangible effects? Mainstream thinking tends to doubt such claims, while heterodox views argue that the way we interpret reality profoundly impacts habits, relationships, and life goals. From various perspectives, simply acknowledging that there may be dimensions beyond the tangible can foster greater empathy. Concepts like cosmic unity or shared consciousness lead to a more compassionate view of others, suggesting that the boundaries between individuals and the collective are less rigid than we might think. At the same time, studies indicate that meditation or spiritual contemplation practices inspired by these paradigms lead to improved well-being and emotional balance. Is this effect purely psychological, or is there indeed a connection with subtle energy fields? The debate remains open, supported by solid arguments on both sides. It is also notable that contact with the unknown can spark creativity. Countless reports from inventors and artists show that moments of insight often emerge from deep relaxation or expanded awareness, whether through meditation, lucid dreaming, or even unusual experiences. Authors like Aldous Huxley, in his studies on altered perceptions, point out that the ability to embrace the new and the unexpected drives human innovation. By contrast, skeptical voices maintain that such notions could encourage fantastical escapism, fueling illusions and contempt for logic. This presents a dilemma. Does imagination become a genuine source of solutions or fertile ground for uncontrollable daydreams? Another significant implication is the re-evaluation of deep-rooted beliefs. Many mystics and consciousness researchers assert that experiencing visionary or spiritual states challenges assumptions once considered unquestionable. This process can lead to a kind of inner rebellion, where values inherited from institutionalized religions or materialistic perspectives are put to the test. Historians note that times of intense cultural change often coincide with the spread of doctrines that expand conventional ideas of what is possible. For example, during the Renaissance, the revival of Hermetic and Kabbalistic texts blended with scientific discoveries to reshape society's view of reality. However, this openness to the extraordinary is not free from controversy. Some people warn that encouraging belief in parallel universes or spiritual guides can pave the way for manipulation or fraud, since ill-intentioned individuals might use these concepts to gain followers or personal advantage. This warning highlights the importance of a balanced critical mindset that is capable of engaging with the rigor of empirical investigation and is willing to recognize the complexity of the unknown. On a collective level, each personal awakening potentially contributes to the formation of a broader consciousness that transcends limiting beliefs and acknowledges the multifaceted nature of reality. From this angle, salvation would not be about blindly embracing any dogma, but about being open to the idea that life may be far more versatile and profound than what common sense or traditional institutions generally admit. Thus emerges the notion that by accepting uncertainty and mystery, people come closer to a genuinely transformative journey. A frequent theme in many mystical and philosophical circles is that all this discourse on invisible worlds, archetypal symbols, and subtle realities converges toward one critical point: internal change in the individual. This shift in perspective, often described as awakening, rarely resembles what institutionalized traditions would call salvation by way of dogmatic adherence. On the contrary, the argument is that true transformation happens when a person realizes in a visceral way that the barriers between self and universe are largely restrictive constructs. What do you think? Could this be the major challenge posed by so many traditions, even if expressed in different languages? In short, the earlier reflections suggest that symbols like hybrid beings, color schemes, and spiritual guides function as keys that unlock inner doors. Each facet under examination, from encountering the new to discarding old layers of belief, implies a dynamic in which reality is revealed to be more diverse than common sense allows. At the same time, legitimate controversies persist. Much of the scientific establishment demands repeatable testing and solid demonstrations, while esoteric currents see personal experience as undeniable proof. This apparent conflict, however, may be questioned because those who navigate both spheres often find common ground, especially when it comes to the transformative power of lived experience. Thus, the conclusion of this expository and analytical journey is an invitation to reinterpret the idea of salvation. It is not a prize given by some external entity, but rather a process of expanding consciousness that arises from within, spurred on by contact with less obvious realities. This openness can lead to new practical behaviors, greater empathy, and ultimately, more responsible and lucid engagement with the world. In this sense, numerous traditions, no matter how distinct they seem, converge on the message that the path to the sacred inevitably involves direct, personal encounters with mysteries that ordinary logic does not fully explain. In the end, no single theory offers a final answer. The orthodox and unorthodox roads can coexist, each contributing its own piece of insight. Still, the most meaningful legacy may be the reminder that by moving beyond old paradigms, a person finds within themselves the key to understanding. Those brave enough to consider dimensions beyond the obvious discover that salvation, far from being tied to institutional creeds, springs from a commitment to inner inquiry, the courage to question certainties, and above all, the ability to recognize the intrinsic sacredness of life. This is how our reflective journey ends, leaving it open to each individual to choose which interpretation to embrace. After all, everyone decides whether, when confronted with mystery, they prefer to reject what does not fit the norm or to open the door to a deeper encounter with what we have chosen to call reality. Every change starts with recognizing your role as co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We have created a set of audio tools to help you access this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, type in the comments, "It made sense to me."